Hey guys, Adrian Jensen from FootageCrate.com. Today I'm going to show you how to emulate this effect from the Harry Potter movies. Pretty cool, right? I'll also be showing you how you can drastically change the look of it just by swapping out the stock footage. If I've got your attention, let's get started. So you may have noticed this crop of new magic spell effects that have popped up on the Footage Crate website, and that is what we are going to be working with today. To start us off, I already have a composition with me and my twin brother, me in a different shirt, pretending to shoot magic at each other. And I also have this pre-tracked because since this footage is kind of dark and kind of grainy and the wand is just not really a good track point, I had to do this by hand, which is why I'm not showing it to you because it took forever and it made me very sad. I also have a null in the middle in between the two wands, which I have animated using a wiggle expression. And I actually am going to show you a trick with that. So if you make a new null object, you want to stick it in between your two wands. Try to get it as most in the middle as you can. And twirl down the position property, push Alt and hit the stopwatch to make an expression. And if you type something like wiggle with a lowercase w, open parentheses, a number which represents how many times a second you want it to move. I'm going to do 3 for this example. The second number represents how many pixels you want it to move in any direction. So I'm going to say maybe 100. So this is going to move 3 times a second up to 100 pixels. So I'll close out of that. As you can see, now it's moving. But the wiggle expression is random. So if I were to duplicate this, you'll see that the next one has a different movement to it. And if I duplicate it again, there's more that are all different. And this will cause problems for us because we're going to be doing some duplicating and some pre-composing. So if you choose to animate with a wiggle expression, what you're also going to want to do is push the stopwatch just to make a keyframe. Right click on that keyframe, go to Keyframe Assistant, and click Convert Expression to Keyframes. And then it turns off your expression. You can delete the expression if you want. You don't have to though because it's turned off. So now this is animated with keyframes, and if I duplicate it, you'll see that the next one is exactly the same. So that's perfect. That is what we're going to need to be true to make this effect work. Back to the Footage Crate website, I'm going to select a couple of spells I want to use, and I'm just going to use these first 2 because they're supposed to represent just standard magic spells from like the Harry Potter series. So I'm going to go ahead and download both of them. Of course, I'll import those into my project. So first I'm going to drag both of those in, and right off the bat I'm going to pre-compose both of them individually. And that is so if I change my mind later and I want to make these a different color or I want to use a different piece of footage, I have the ability to do that very easily. So this first one, I'm going to pre-compose, leave all the attributes in this composition, and I'm just going to name it green spell. Okay, and then from this perspective, nothing is really going to have changed except for the layers a different color now. But that's perfect, it's just what we want. I'm going to do the same thing with the other one, which is red. So I'm going to call it red spell. Nice, and those are good to go. Secondly, I'm going to scale and position them into the scene to roughly the size that I'm going to want them to end up being. So I'll start with the green, and I feel like the green is going to be on this side. This guy's the bad guy. As a matter of fact, these nulls that I have, I've already labeled them green null and red null because I knew what colors I was going to use from the jump. So I'm just going to flip this over, and the scaling doesn't have to be super precise, but in general, it's going to work better for you if you scale it to be smaller than you need it rather than bigger. Now, the distances between all these things are constantly changing, so you're not going to be able to scale it to an exact right size, but it's definitely smarter to go with smaller than bigger if you have to choose between the two. So this one looks good enough for me. And if in my footage, these guys are kind of both like square to the camera, but if they weren't and there was some perspective, now would be a good time to add some perspective to these clips. And you could do that by pulling up a corner pin effect. And then you can use the corner pin to just add a little bit of perspective. That's only if you need it for your shot. We don't need it for this shot, so I'm not going to. So that one is fine there. The red spell, we're going to do the same thing. Okay, that's cool. So I'm going to pre-compose each of them again. So this will be just red spell pre-comp. And this time you definitely want to move the attributes into the new composition. Don't leave them in this one. Move it. And we'll do the same to the other spell. Okay, and now the way we're going to animate these is with the puppet pin tool, and they were actually designed specifically to be used with the puppet pin tool, which is why they're not a normal aspect ratio that you might expect stock footage you download to be. They're kind of weird in that they're long shaped, but that's why. So if we click this pin here, that's the puppet pin tool. I'll start with the green one, and you want to add one pin on the origin of the spell and the other one on the tip, right? So now we can move that around and maybe you can see how this is going to work. And I'll show you now the reason we wanted to scale them to be smaller than they need to be is because if we stretch them out, they still look good, but if we stretch them in, they start getting all distorted and funky looking. I'll change that to full resolution so you can see how nasty that is on the edge and how the origin of the spell isn't really staying true to the pin. Whereas if we move it further away, that's looking much better. So I wasn't just telling you that to be a jerk. It's really the right thing to do. So on the puppet pins, we'll open up the mesh under deform, open up both those pins, and again, we're going to use expressions. So you just want to hit Alt and push the keyframes on those. We're going to pull this way up. You're going to want to open up the green null, which is the one that we're using for this spell, and also the middle null, which we'll be using for both. Pull up the position properties on those. You can just hit P to pull that up and save yourself a little bit of space. And now the first puppet pin that we placed was the one that was at the origin of the spell, so that's going to connect to the green null. So basically all you have to do is grab this pick whip and parent it to the position property. And then do the same on the other one, but parent that to the middle. Now if we pull this back up, you'll see that our spell is connected to both those nulls really well. And it's stuck to our wand, it's stuck to the middle, which the middle isn't really stuck to anything, and that's okay. And another thing that's cool about the puppet pin tool is that it supports motion blur. So you can actually turn on the motion blur and add a little bit more like good looking realism to your shot. We still have our puppet pin tool active. So I'm just going to add one pin here at the origin, another one at the end. Let's open those up. Hold down Alt, push the stopwatch to activate expressions. We can close the green null, we don't need that anymore, but open up the position on the red null, which you hit P to do. So on this first one, all we got to do is parent it to the position of the red null. The second pin, parent it to the position of the middle null. And you will see that now these two spells are marrying one another in the middle. They look kind of funky because they're on black background, so we can change them to something like an add transfer mode maybe, or a screen transfer mode depending on your shot, or any other one of these transfer modes, or ones you think look good depending on your footage and your style. I'm going to stick with add. And those look great. They look fantastic. The way these spells are designed, every single one of them reaches the end on frame number 10. So no matter which spell you use, as long as you start them at the same time, they'll hit each other at the same time. So these are definitely going to look better if we have something on the wand so the spell is not just popping out like that. We could use a lens flare, but I think that would be a little bit overkill. So here's what I'm going to do. Let's make a new composition, but it doesn't have to be very big. Something like 200 by 200 pixels will do, and we'll just call it light ball. Okay, so let's add a new solid to that for the background. We'll just make it black. And then we'll add another new solid inside that composition, which we will make white. And to that, we'll add a ellipse mask. So if you just select the ellipse tool and double click it, it makes a perfect circle for you automatically if your composition is a square, which ours is. So we want to add a little bit of feather to this. So we'll feather it out something that looks good, maybe 40 pixels. But now our feathering is kind of being cut off by the edge. So to counteract that, we need to change the expansion to negative 40 pixels. So now it all fits inside, and we can bring the opacity of it down a little bit. If you hit T, that pulls up opacity. Bring that down. And now if we duplicate that, and we can change our second one to be a little bit smaller and maybe put it on an add transfer mode or something like that. And then another one to make smaller. And what this does is it gives us a hot spot in the middle. So it kind of falls off more realistically. So this is why we would do something like this instead of just using one solid. If you use a whole bunch of them, you get this nice fall off. Actually, if you want, you can definitely add an expression to the opacity of these. So I'm going to just alt click it. Maybe type wiggle, something like 3 times a second by a value of 10. Something simple like that. And you can actually right click on that and hit copy expression only and highlight all of them. Just hit Control V to paste. And before the randomness of the wiggle expression was working against us, but now it's actually working in favor of us. These are all going to be different, and it's going to add a lot of cool looking random wiggle to this, which will accent the chaotic effect. So if we just go into our project, grab that light ball, bring that in, and if you hold down Shift and parent it to one of the nulls, either the red or the green one, it'll jump to that position and stay there. And if you change it to add, now we have a little glowy ball on the end of the one, and you can hit Control D to duplicate it, hold down Shift and parent it to the other null, and now we each have one. All we have to do is add some color to those. So you can do this with a curves effect. It's a good way to do it. On this first one, we'll drop a curves effect on there. The curves effect would not work if we didn't have that black background, so that's why we have it. Let's go into the green channel and just pull that up to make it more green. If you want it to look more yellow in the middle, you do that in the red channel by pulling up just the top part of the red curve, but you can pull the bottom one back down. But if you go down too far, it'll start turning blue on the edges, which maybe you want. I think it looks kind of good. And then on the blue channel, you can pull it down to get more of a lime green color, or up to get more of a blue. I'm going to pull it down a little bit. And then on the red one, we'll do the same. It's looking pretty good. You guys are doing a great job. So now another thing we can do is add some light being casted onto the ground from these spells. And the way that I would like to do that is first by pre-composing them. So we can actually duplicate the middle null because we're going to need it again later. So that copy we'll just bring to the bottom to get it out of our way. And then go ahead and highlight all these other things and just pre-compose them. We can change that back to an add transfer mode. Now we can go ahead and duplicate that. Grab one of these grab one of these top handles up here and pull it down to just kind of squish it as far as scale. Let's give that a good squish. And we'll also add a fast blur. Pump that up. We'll add a curves to it to kind of brighten it up. Maybe the fast blur is going to look better after the curves. And then we can also add a hue and saturation to it, because what's happening is our colors are kind of turning white and I want them to remain either blue or green, whatever it is. So if we just bump up the saturation, that's what that's going to do. For good measure, we can add another fast blur to it. To make that a little bit more realistic, what we can do is duplicate the background, bring that up above the casted light, and add a tint to it, add a levels to it, which is very similar to curves, but just the interface of it is a little bit different. So just whichever one you're more comfortable with, you can use. And what we want to do is crunch these levels together until we start seeing a lot of detail in the ground. So this is too far on the white because it's starting to blow out. There we go. We have that nice ground detail, which is just exactly what we want. So now we can go back to this light cast layer and use that new background layer as a luma matte. And now what's happening is the natural detail in the ground is cutting into our light, which makes it look super realistic. Here's an optional step. You want to add some extra energy to this point where the spells lock together. You can go into Footage Crate and find this piece of footage here, which is the ground cracks impact. I'll go ahead and give that a download. If I just bring that in and put it below our beams but above our casted light, we can just scale that down to fit into our scene a little better and change it in time so that it starts right here at this impact. Maybe I'll add a fill to it, which I'll pick a color from the scene to make it more realistic, like this blue that's on the ground. And also it's a lot sharper than my footage is, so if I add a fast blur as well, that'll make it look more realistic, just 1 or 2 pixels. There you go. It shows that there's a little bit of force when these things hit. Back to the Footage Crate website, click this After Effects button and look for this free lens flares package. This is pretty cool. As you can see, more customization to this. There's me talking, explaining how it works. Just download that project file and you can import that. If you didn't know that, that's a hot tip, that you can import a project file into your project files. There's all these different lens flare presets. We can just pick one that we like. And I think I like number 5 because it's nice and warm. So what we can do is we can go into the main comp and open up the position property for this middle null. And you can just hit Control-C to copy all those keyframes. Go into flare number 5, and on these controls we have this center point. So you're going to want to hit stopwatch to start keyframing on that. And on any layer, if you hit U on your keyboard, it'll open up everything you have keyframed or expression. So since that's the only thing we have a keyframe on, it'll pull up the position. And we can hit Control-V to paste those keyframes so that now this will move exactly like our middle null. And I'm also going to up the flicker speed and the flicker amount on that since it's supposed to be a chaotic effect. But now we can go back to our main comp and pull that file in, and you should see that it lines up perfectly with our middle null. The only thing to do now is see the flare is kind of stuck in the middle when there's no reason for it to be there. So we just need to trim it. Well, if we just go down to the frame where these beams intersect one another and just trim it to there, and now it makes sense. And that's the effect finished. But now here's the cool part about how these effects are designed. Since before we really started compositing these beams, we just pre-composed them by themselves. We have these two compositions called red spell and green spell. We can just open those up, go back into Footage Crate, and if you search for magic, you'll be able to pull up all the magic spells, and we can just pick 2 more. So I'm gonna pick this yellow and purple one, I think. Download that. And I'll also pick this blue one here. Download that. Bring those both into the project. and just replace them. So I'll replace this green one with spell number 10. I'll replace this red one with spell number 12. If we go back to our main comp, you can see those will update. We should change the color of the light on the wands. We have to do that manually, but you will see that these spells still react to the tracking. They still hit each other at the right time. They still cast light on the ground, but now the light matches the color of the spell, what it should be. And that's going to be the end of the tutorial, guys. That's how you do this effect. That's how you use these elements. So thank you so much for watching. Bye.